Good afternoon, good morning, and good evening to everyone. It's lovely to have you all with us, those who already are and those who will incorporate shortly. We have a very impressive lineup of participants for this, this webinar. This is in our series of webinars with Dirasat and the UNDP on the impact, socioeconomic impact of the COVID-19 pandemic in Bahrain. Today's webinar will be on the socioeconomic impact of the corona pandemic in Bahrain, with an emphasis on some new data that we have extracted through a series of surveys, of household surveys that were carried out in Bahrain, in the UK, and in the US for comparison services, with a focus on the results on Bahrain. But before we move to the presentations, I would like to share with you some of the information of our speakers. We're very, very happy to have His Excellency Ambassador Nazrul Islam. He's the ambassador of Bangladesh, recently arrived to Bahrain, and we're very, very pleased to have you. Ambassador, thank you for joining us. We have Stuart Summers, Mr. Stuart Summers, who's the Deputy Ambassador in Bahrain at the Embassy of the United Kingdom. We have Rabia Qureshi. Thank you for joining us, Rabia. She is the Counselor for Political and Economic Affairs at the Embassy of the United States of America in Bahrain. And of course, we have Dr. Omar Al-Ubaidli, Director of Studies and Research at Dirasat. The introductions for each one of the speakers will take place when right before they take the floor. But I would like to start, before we go into the core of the presentation, of the results that will be introduced, and they will be the journey through the results will be done through Omar, and he will share some of the main charts. There's a wealth of information to share, but we will see that presentation through with Omar in a few minutes. What I wanted to do at first, just to kickstart, is to share with you a little bit of the context. As representative of UNDP, I want you to know that what we're doing here in Bahrain is something that is happening across the world. In terms of socioeconomic response plans and the socioeconomic impact assessments. Precisely 162 countries are currently working on this front. And in particular, UNDP and UN partners have been preparing 117 socioeconomic impact assessments around the world, around 5 regions in the world. Of course, what we should understand is that this is not a cookie cutter exercise. It's not implemented, designed, and carried out the same way in each country. Every country is its universe. It has its own priorities, and the COVID-19 pandemic has had not necessarily the same impact in all these countries or the same nature. So of course, in every country, this analysis will have different points of emphasis depending on the context. And we would leverage on existing information on how the pandemic is affecting the population, the economy, and the ecosystem. Here in Bahrain, there are other studies that try to capture the impact of the pandemic in the economy, for instance. And I want to note always, we've done in the past, the work of the Bahrain Chamber of Commerce and Industry that does periodic reviews on the economy as a whole, and also interviewing specific businesses. But essentially, what we're doing then is trying to adapt a framework of analysis to very diverse countries. And we've done it across the world, and Bahrain is one of those countries. Bahrain is a small island state that has done quite well on the health side of the pandemic so far, even though the economy has been hit with an economic contraction. And there has been impact on the society. And that's exactly what we're trying to tease out with these surveys and these interviews and the effort that we're carrying out. And some population groups arguably are more exposed than others to these to the challenges brought about by the pandemic. And also some sectors, the tourism, hospitality sector, construction, real estate, and we see mainly small and medium enterprises also as being falling victims of the challenge from the pandemic. And that is where the emphasis of the socioeconomic impact assessment will go and is going in Bahrain. For this project that gathers us today, we are very fortunate as UNDP to have been able to partner with Dirasat. Dirasat is a think tank in Bahrain. For those of you listening to us from outside Bahrain, is the most prestigious think tank in Bahrain, and it has been a long-time friend of UNDP and the UN. We have produced many results with our Dirasat colleagues. This particular webinar with Dirasat will review, as I mentioned, preliminary results of brand new household perception surveys. They were carried out a few weeks ago on the COVID-19. Omar will explain more, that were designed and were carried out by a joint team, Dirasat UNDP team. As you will see, we try to analyze the Bahraini population, of course, and focusing also on the Bangladeshi community living in Bahrain specifically, because we want to have a sense on how this population group living in Bahrain, quite a sizable group of the population here in Bahrain, how they fared during the pandemic until now. And we were able to do that. And I really want to acknowledge this publicly, thanks to the wonderful partnership with the Bangladeshi embassy, with His Excellency the Ambassador Islam and his great team. We also used identical surveys for the UK and for the US, mainly for benchmarking the results. And I'm very, very pleased again to acknowledge the collaboration and the presence and participation today by two representatives of respectively the UK embassy and the US embassy, Stuart and Rabia. So to finish with this joint initiative, what we're planning to do really is to capitalize on the results of this survey, have additional surveys in the future, structured interviews through our overall socioeconomic impact assessment project, so that we aim ultimately at improving policies and building forward a more resilient and sustainable society in Bahrain. So this is it on my end. I want to now pass on the virtual microphone to Dr. Omar Al-Budaidli. He's quite famous and well known in Bahrain. He's a friend and a great collaborator. He directs studies and research at Dirasat, and he's Director of Economics and Energy Studies at Dirasat, which is the Bahrain Center of Strategic International Energy Studies. He previously worked as an assistant professor of economics at George Mason University in the US, and also was a member of Virginia Governor Bob McDonnell's Joint Advisory Board on Economists. Dr. Al-Ubaidli received his BA in economics from University of Cambridge, Queen's College, and his MA and PhD in economics from the University of Chicago. Dr. Al-Ubaidli's research has been published in several international peer-reviewed journals and has been featured by media outlets, including The Economist magazine. Thank you very much. So, Dr. Omar, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Stefano, for the kind introduction. And I'd also like to affirm on behalf of Dirasat the appreciation for the contribution of UNDP to this project as partners, and also to the contributions of the embassies of Bangladesh, USA, and UK in helping to make this project a success. I will just share the slides, bear with me. Okay, so hopefully you can see everyone's favorite spiky ball, and I'll get straight in. Okay, so the font size unfortunately may be a little bit small, so you have to squint, but I'll try my best to talk through some of these. The graph on the left, this is just to give you some idea of how the health side of the crisis has developed in the three countries, Bahrain, UK, and USA. So on the left slide, you can see the cases per million, and on the right side, you can see the deaths per million. The general takeaway from this is that Bahrain's had the highest cases per million by some way, but when it comes to deaths per million, as Stefano mentioned when he was talking about the health side, it's been significantly more benign. And Bahrain managed to avoid the large initial spike in deaths, which the UK and the US witnessed during late April and early March. And in terms of actual deaths compared to the world average, Bahrain is approximately equal to the world average. The survey, we had 3 primary goals in this survey. The first was to achieving a high rate of participation among Bahrainis and non-Bahrainis residing in Bahrain. In previous surveys we've done on COVID and on other issues, we've struggled to get high rates of participation among non-Bahrainis for a variety of reasons, such as linguistic ones and distribution of availability of computers and smartphones and so on and so forth. That's why we were very happy that the Embassy of Bangladesh was able to support us directly in securing a higher level of participation among the Bangladeshi community. The other second goal was to produce something which is complementary to the existing data. Stefano mentioned the Chamber of Commerce and Industry, which has been conducting a series of impressive surveys, canvassing the opinion of the constituents. Also, the Labour Market Regularity Authority has high frequency, very detailed data on employment. So we wanted to produce data that was complementary to these. And thirdly, data that would support policy making and at the same time being scientifically valuable. And that's why it was very important for us to have the UK and US as benchmark countries. So it wasn't just sort of academic interest, it's something substantive for substantive reasons for doing that. The graph on the right shows you the number of observations we gathered. So we had about 660 Bahrainis in Bahrain and about 700 Bahrainis, 300 Bangladeshis. In Bahrain, and then about 1,000 in the UK and the US. And then in terms of the populations they're representing, then we've got a very high representation for Bangladeshis and for Bahrainis. And for the UK and US, they're much lower, but they're still, you know, very comprehensive. Notably, the US and UK populations are surveys are nationally representative. Participants, so we don't have to worry about weighting. In the UK, in the Bahrain, in the Bahrain case for both Bahrainis and Bangladeshis, the samples are nearly representative, and so we use some simple weighting to make sure that the results I'll be sharing with you are indeed reflective of the population. And we thank the IGA in Bahrain for providing us with the data so that we could do those balancing exercises. The questions, we had 5 tranches of questions. As Stefano mentioned, each partnership is free to to select its questions. There isn't a sort of centralized bank which everyone has to pick from. So we looked at employment, specifically primary and secondary jobs, both in terms of whether or not you do have a job and also the hours you work. Secondly, we listed a series of difficulties that people have been facing relating to COVID, and we asked people to describe how much difficulty they've been facing in confronting those challenges. Thirdly, we looked at the allocation of time to non-work tasks to complement the working hours data we had at the beginning. And then fourthly, we looked at the support people expressed, the kind of support people expressed the greatest desire for receiving in dealing with the COVID-19 related challenges. And finally, looked at their plans for dealing with the financial challenges. And as Stefano mentioned, like everywhere, the Bahraini economy has been hit. And so that motivates the last question. So first of all, we look at the effect on employment. So each of these 4 collections is a country, or a community, I should say, in the case of Bahrain, because in Bangladesh it's separated from nationals. And the colors, the blue represents primary employment, and then the green represents secondary employment, and then the solid bar represents what it was before the pandemic, and the textured one, or the dotted one or striped one, represents what it was after the pandemic. So what I want you to take from this, well, first of all, the UK and the US look very similar in that the approximately somewhere between 60 and 70%, about 65% of people had a primary job prior to the start of the pandemic, and that number fell to around 60%, so fell by 7 or 8 percentage points. Whereas in Bahrain, we have quite a large divergence. In the case of nationals, it fell by only 4 percentage points, whereas for Bangladeshis, it fell by about 22 percentage points. And this is a recurring theme throughout this survey, where we find, first of all, the UK and the US are quite similar. And secondly, Bahrain is to some extent, the Bahraini nationals are to some extent affected less than the national average in the UK and the US, whereas Bangladeshis are affected more. At this point, I should point out that Bangladeshis among the migrant workers represent approximately half of the Bahraini population and 3/4 of the workforce. Bangladeshis happen to be one of the communities that have, on average, lower education levels and lower wages, and so that means that they're likely to be more exposed to the adverse consequences of COVID. In studies conducted in OECD countries, there's a clear pattern whereby people with lower skill levels and lower salaries are affected much more significantly than those with higher salaries. So that's why Bangladeshis should be taken, in the case of Bahrain, as representing an upper bound to some extent of the impact, certainly on the economic dimension, of the impact of the pandemic. So anyway, Bahrainis less than the UK and US, and Bangladeshis more. And then in the case of secondary jobs, we find in the UK and the US, the secondary jobs have been relatively flat, unaffected, whereas in Bahrain, both for nationals and for Bangladeshis, has been a significantly larger effect. Although it could be the case that, so there we think that what's going on is that in the UK and the US, the labor markets are more flexible. And so people have been probably seeking secondary jobs in an attempt to supplement their income. Whereas in Bahrain, the labor market, certainly for citizens, is not as flexible. And then for Bangladeshis, just many of these jobs have not rematerialized in the wake of COVID. Then we talk about this graph looks at the difficulty of dealing with various challenges. So now we're switching to where each color represents a community, and each collection of bars represents a difficulty. So the first difficulty you ask people about is difficulty in accessing necessities such as food and personal protection equipment, PVE, I think it is, or the personal equipment for protecting you from COVID and all, masks, etc. And here, and this is something where in the UK and the US and for Bahrainis, it wasn't a major problem. I think we all remember at the beginning of the pandemic, people had some trouble getting their hands on masks, but by the time this survey was conducted, which is in September, that problem did not seem to be persistent for each of those communities, whereas for Bangladeshis, it still remained. And we think that it's because of the significant cost of acquiring food and water when your livelihood has been threatened, as it has done in the case of Bangladeshis. Then we ask people about the difficulty of accessing psychosocial support. And this is something that's more significant in the UK and the US and for Bahrainis, but again, significantly worse. Bangladeshis are reporting significantly higher levels of distress. Accessing education, leisure time, all these other ones, we see a high level of economic distress being articulated by all respondents. And in general, Bahrainis are the community least affected, Bahrainis in Bahrain, and Bangladeshis are affected more. Again, also, the UK and the US are quite similar. So the key takeaway from this figure is that people are suffering significantly everywhere, but that Bahrainis seem to be doing better off than Bangladeshis, and UK and US somewhere in the middle. This figure shows you the allocation of non-work tasks, time allocation. So if there's no bar, so the line is centered, the graph is centered at 0, so that means that you didn't increase or decrease your time for that task. Then you've got the colors representing the communities, and then the rows representing the tasks. The first takeaway from this is that Bangladeshis have decreased the time to virtually every non-work task, with the exception of consumption of media. And there, our interpretation, and we'll be conducting a follow-up study hopefully to get to the bottom of this, but we think that the reason for this is that they spend a lot more time on job search. They're looking to secure alternative employment, alternative sources of income. For the Bahrainis in Bahrain, for the British and for the Americans, or I should say people residing in the UK and the US, we see a pattern where some tasks have a significant increase in the time allocated to them, such as preparing meals, childcare, homeschooling, assisting the elderly, and certainly communication media, watching and that includes things like Netflix as well. And then on the negative side, people have been exercising less in general, spending a lot less time on health except exercise, and by that we mean going to the clinic for example, your regular diabetes appointment or for your monthly checkups. And also social life, obviously, that's been hit very hard, and just general leisure and entertainment. Again, the UK and US are generally quite similar, although here there are a few more differences. Here, the Bahrainis look distinct there are differences between Bahrainis and the UK and US are quite interesting. For example, Bahrainis have been doing significantly less exercise, whereas the people residing in the UK and US have been doing more. There, we think it's a case of weather. I know Stefano's a keen runner, so he's probably been affected by the heat of trying to run in June, July, and August. Whereas in the UK and US, in many areas at least, the weather is far more conducive to doing exercise outside. Another one I forgot to mention in the negative side is volunteering at non-profits, and hopefully if we get the chance, we'll be doing a follow-up survey with civil society sector, which has surely been hit hard in terms of, because it relies so much on volunteer labor to realize its goals, and it's certainly been disrupted in Bahrain. Another key difference between Bahrainis and UK and US is in communication and media. Bahrainis have been allocating more time to that systematically, and there we think it's partially due to the digital infrastructure. So for those of you living in Bahrain, you know Bahrain has a very high internet and mobile penetration rate by global standards, and also the population is much younger than the UK and US population, so they're more tech savvy for demographic reasons, and so quite happy to sit in front of the telephone for 4 or 5 hours a day compared to their counterparts in the UK and US. The most desired forms of support. So here we get some interesting differences again between the different communities. So for the Bangladeshi community, we can see that it's primarily on economic forms of support, job information, i.e. trying to secure employment, and rent, support with rent. And obviously rent represents a significantly higher proportion of consumption and of household budget for a Bangladeshi migrant worker in Bahrain than it does for any of the other representative populations, because their incomes are significantly below the average for the residents. And then in the case of Bahrainis, we see an elevated citation of loan deferrals as being the desired source of support, and this was before last week's decision by the Central Bank of Bahrain to extend loan support or loan deferrals until the end of the year. So clearly loan deferrals are something that's important to Bahrainis in a way that it's not so important to people in the UK and the US. In the UK and the US, we see importance placed on training first of all, and higher than it is in the case of Bahrain. And also the spike in loan deferrals for Bahrainis is sort of more or less evenly distributed across the other things for people in the UK and the US. Interestingly enough, we had quite a lot of others for the UK and US, more than for the other two communities, and that was dominated by people saying, I don't want any support. So there's lots of people in the UK and the US who are doing fine and were quite indignant at the assumption that there was some form of support they actually needed. Power to them, I guess. And then for plans for dealing with the financial difficulties, so we had various sort of social and institutional channels for seeking financial support, such as asking friends and family, getting a loan, so on and so forth. And here we see, in the case of the UK and the US, people are far more likely to decrease their decreasing their spending and to marshal or to correct their financial situation, whereas Bahrainis are far more likely to seek loans or seek assistance from family and friends and from non-profits. Non-profits, an important difference in non-profits in Bahrain and in the UK and US is that in Bahrain, non-profits are dominated by religious entities which have strong philanthropic activities. So it's very normal for people to seek financial support from their mosques, from their prayer houses, and so on and so forth, from the religious community in Bahrain, in a way that is much reduced in the UK and the US due to obviously the lower levels of religiosity, or at least declared religiosity. And also we have for Bangladeshis seeking employment. It's obviously the fixation on using economic means or support, desired support and plans relating to the economic sphere. Bangladeshis also by far cite the highest desire to seek assistance from the government. We're not sure if they mean the Bahraini government or the Bangladeshi government, and so that's one of the reasons we're hoping to do a follow-up study so we can get a better sense of that. Final remark about this figure is that in Bahrainis in general have significantly lower savings levels than people in the UK and the US, and higher lower cumulative savings, higher levels generally of personal debt, and that could explain why they're less likely to be able to run down savings and more likely to have to seek loans in order to deal with the financial difficulties. And then a couple of figures to show you where we break things down demographically. So, you know, one of the advantages of gathering so many observations for each community is that we can look at the demographic breakdown. For Bangladeshis, we didn't do this because it's so concentrated in, you know, young males, and so there wasn't, the other groups represented only about 10% of the data. But in the case of the UK, US, and Bahrainis, there are significant differences. So here, if we take a look at the case of employment in Bahrain, where we break it down by groups, you can see that in the case of older males and females, we see the usual pattern whereby employment, both primary and secondary, decreases. But interestingly, for younger males and younger females, you'll notice that the dotted bars are higher, and the stripe, the incomplete textures are higher than the solid. What that means is that young males and females of Bahraini citizenship somehow managed to get more jobs than they did before the pandemic. Now, again, this is something we're not going to speculate too much about that because we don't know exactly why that's happened. The project that we're doing with the UNDP has a large stakeholder community and committee, I should say, and we have people representing the youth sector and the Ministry of Labour hopefully shortly, and so we'll be able to get a better sense of exactly how this happened. But it doesn't seem to be a fluke because it's happening both for males and females. So I don't think it's a data anomaly. There definitely seems to be something going on of note. Whereas the US and the UK, which are quite similar, here we'll show the US. The breakdown here shows you uniform decrease in employment levels, certainly for primary jobs. Another notable difference, if I go back to the Bahraini one, is that in the Bahraini one, females tend to have suffered less than males in terms of employment. Whereas if we move to the US case, which is similar to the UK case, if you look at the female cases seem to have suffered more than the males in terms of employment. And this is part of a general trend in OECD countries whereby women's economically at least have been hit harder than male. Now, in the case of the OECD countries, the reason for that are twofold. One is that women tend to work in sectors which have high levels of face-to-face contact, things like personal services, health sector, education sector, and so those are the ones which have suffered systematically larger decreases in employment. And secondly, because due to cultural stereotypes, women have had to bear a greater share in general of the homeschooling and other domestic household production, if you want to use that phrase, activities or responsibilities. In the case of Bahrain, that's reversed in the economic domain, and there's probably a couple of reasons for that. First of all, Bahraini women, notice there's Bahraini women, not women across the economy. Bahraini women tend to work in white collar jobs, especially the government sector. They're overrepresented in the government sector. They're 50% almost 50% of employed Bahrainis in the public sector are women, whereas they represent about 30% of employed Bahrainis in general. And these jobs are protected and more conducive to telework compared to people in the UK and the US. Secondly, in the case of, there's been a royal decree, which you may be familiar with, stating that women with young children, or with children, I should say, who have priority in remote work, which doesn't mean that it's easier, but it doesn't mean at least that you don't lose your job. When it comes to a job where where it might be affected by you not being able to be in the office. And thirdly, and this goes back to the fact that we have Bangladeshis, a lot of the kind of jobs that women are losing systematically in the UK and the US are ones performed by migrant workers. Probably not Bangladeshis, because almost all the Bangladeshis in Bahrain happen to be men. But if we look at communities, especially the Filipino community and the Indian community, there's a lot of, they do a lot of the jobs like personal services, working in beauty salons, working in shops as retail, as salespeople, and so on and so forth. And those are the kind of jobs that women tend to, Bahraini women tend to not do compared to their US and American and British counterparts. And then, yeah, this is in the case of the US, you can see it's bigger for women. And also you don't have this anomalous increase in employment for young people. And then in terms of time allocation, so here I've gone for some stereotyping colors: green for young, blue for middle-aged, and brown for old, to help you decipher the number of graphs, number of figures. And here, so this is the demographic breakdown for time allocation in Bahrain. And you can see predictable patterns. So homeschooling time, the increases in homeschooling are for people who are middle-aged and old. Young people aged 18 to 24 don't have kids in general in Bahrain, and so they don't have homeschooling responsibilities. They also get to sleep more, whereas I'm definitely one of the people who filled out this survey who's been sleeping less due to the various responsibilities. Things like, and here you can see some gender differences as well. So women have got to allocate more time than their male counterparts in every demographic to things like homeschooling, assisting the elderly, and preparing meals. The other important gender difference also, demographic difference happens to be in the media, communications and media. You can see younger people, who are more tech savvy, can do a lot more of that than the older people. And then UK and US, again, very similar. This time I'll show you the UK one. And here you can see a similar pattern, not to the Bahraini case, where young people are sleeping a lot more in the case of younger females, and the homeschooling duties and assisting elderly sort of things that are concentrated in older people. Other interesting demographical differences are leisure being consumed, increase in leisure for young people who don't have family responsibilities in general, whereas for middle and older people, you have a lot less leisure entertainment. And similar patterns for the male-female differences to those reported in the case of Bahrain. Follow-up research, very brief. So those are just, the actual report, which we'll be publishing soon and circulating soon, has, 40 figures, and there's a lot more data which we invite you to look at and reflect upon, and we'd be very happy to see people's feedback. So I can only give you a quick overview here. In terms of follow-up research, so we're going to hopefully do some follow-up surveys and interviews with the Bangladeshi community to get to the bottom of some of the anomalies or some of the unanswered questions we had from the survey. The CBB's, Central Bank of Bahrain's extension of the loan deferral is going to we're currently doing a phone surveys to see how people, given how important loans are to the Bahrainis, we want to understand how they've been affected and what were their alternatives, and that's what we'll be studying hopefully during the coming weeks. So you might get a phone call from our survey team. We'll be conducting a vaccine survey shortly to get a sense of how people feel about vaccines and how what their intentions are. The team will also be doing a survey looking at women to drill down into some of the gender differences and understanding some of the unique problems that women have been facing. We'll be doing an education survey to look at how education has been impacted by the COVID. We're currently undertaking a telemedicine survey, some stakeholder interviews there to understand how, I showed you that in all countries, people have been going to health clinics less for obvious reasons. And we want to understand how successful the transition to telemedicine has been. And also we'll be doing an environmental survey. I'm sure, like me, you've seen many plastic items discarded in car parks, and there are concerns about what the long-term implications of that are, as well as the more positive things such as decreased traffic and emissions. So hopefully in the coming weeks, we'll be able to organize follow-up. We'll be doing follow-up seminars to share those results, and we'll be posting everything on our websites. Thank you very much. Stefano, back to you.
Thank you, Omar. A heroic mini marathon to go through only some of the results. I mean, as you said, there's an enormous variety of additional information from these surveys. And also there are many ways to represent it. You know, we chose one. We worked hard in the past weeks to really try to represent it in a way that is most telling of a story. I think that there are very many stories that we already can take away from this preliminary analysis, but you will find more in the report that we will soon be sharing with all of you, make public. So follow us on social media, both Dirasat and UNDP Bahrain. So now I would like to move to another segment of our conversation today, where we will have the three countries that we've heard about, you know, three nationalities that we've heard about besides the Bahraini. So we heard about Bangladeshis living in Bahrain, we heard about Americans, or the American survey, the survey that was carried out among the American population, and we heard about the UK. So I would like to have our three very patient speakers give us a few views of what they've heard, what they see, and what they are seeing in Bahrain, since the three of you are based in Bahrain, and I'm sure you have some ideas and considerations to share. I would like to start with Rabia. Rabia Qureshi is a counselor for political and economic affairs at the Embassy of the US in Bahrain. She's a foreign service officer in the US Department of State. She completed diplomatic assignments in Abuja, Nigeria, Riyadh, Washington, DC, and at the US mission to the United Nations in New York. Wow, I didn't know about that. Rabia, this is always useful for me also to know. That's great. Where you served, Rabia served as political advisor on the United Nations Security Council team. Since July 2019, Ms. Qureshi has been counselor for political and economic affairs at the US Embassy in Bahrain. She's a graduate of the US Department of State's Arabic Field School in Muscat, Oman, and received her master's degree in Middle Eastern, South Asian, and African Studies from Columbia University. Over to you, Rabia. Thank you again for being with us. About 5-7 minutes for you. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you, and good afternoon to you all. Thank you to my distinguished panelists. Thank you, Dr. Omar, for a very illuminating analysis of what I think is just the beginning of a lot more important reflection. So we look forward to that. And thank you, Stefano. Thank you to UNDP in general and Dirasat. You are all doing important work here and making very valuable contributions to the global fight against COVID-19. Just a few observations from my side. I guess what I would say at the top is that, you know, the US Embassy supports the efforts of the people and government of Bahrain to contain and to mitigate a pandemic that, as the joint UNDP Dirasat study have illustrated today, is affecting lives and livelihoods around the world. And as you noted at the top, Stefano, it is affecting them in unequal ways. And so again, we look forward to seeing the results of the additional surveys and to really drilling down on what is happening and what can be done, importantly, for policymakers. So those are efforts that we certainly support. On our side as the US Embassy, as I said, we're supportive of, you know, Bahrain's determination to really deal with both the economic fallout and also the impact on society generally among both the citizen population and the resident population in Bahrain. So those are efforts that we continue to support. A few ways that we're doing that, for example, the United States Embassy has partnered with commercial companies here, US companies and also Bahraini companies. There's West Point Home, there's Acel Bio, and an array of other commercial entities that are supporting, again, both the socio-economic piece of it and also the health sector side of it. We're also facilitating contacts between the government of Bahrain and US pharmaceutical firms to address some of those issues that you had mentioned earlier related to therapeutics, vaccines that are under development, and also trying to look at other ways, you know, broader ways that we can help support the efforts here. I would say globally, the United States is proud to invest in the health sector development of therapeutics and vaccines. Many, I think there's over 100 or so that are under development around the world, and we're hopeful that will help the global fight against COVID-19. Those are my observations at the top, and again, I thank you for your time.
Thank you so very much, Rabia, and thank you for your insights and also for the hope or you're launching future collaborations, which we really look forward to enhancing with the embassy. So thank you so very much. The next speaker, I would like to give the floor to our dear ambassador of the embassy for the Embassy of Bangladesh, His Excellency Nazrul Islam. He's been in the kingdom for just a few months, but already extremely active, if I may say, and I had the pleasure to meet him. He belongs to the 1995 batch of Bangladesh Foreign Service. Prior to being in Bahrain, he was Deputy Chief of Mission in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, and concurrently Bangladesh Ambassador to the Islamic Military Counterterrorism Coalition based in Riyadh. He also served concurrently as Deputy Permanent Representative to the Organization of Islamic Cooperation. So in almost 2.5 decades of career as a diplomat, he has served as Chargé d'Affaires at the Bangladesh Embassy in Beirut, Counselor at the Bangladesh High Commission in Canberra, First Secretary at the Bangladesh Embassy in Baghdad, Second Secretary at the Bangladesh Embassy in Seoul. Ambassador Dr. Islam has also served in domestic assignments in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs as Director General for West and Central Asia and Director General on Parliamentary Affairs. Director also of the SAARC and BIMSTEC from 2004 to 2006 and desk officer in different sections. He holds a Doctor of Philosophy in Water Policy and Governance from the University of New England, Australia, and a master's and honors degree in economics from the University of Dhaka. Very impressive resume, Your Excellency. Thank you so much for being with us. It's been a great cooperation, starting from informal conversations with you that really blossomed into a truly spectacular collaboration that we hope to continue in the future. Over to you, Your Excellency, please.
Yeah, thank you, Stefano, UN representative in Bahrain, and Director Dr. Omar Al-Obaidli of Darasat, and my distinguished two colleagues from British Embassy, Deputy Head of Mission, Stuart, and also Councillor Rabia, and also distinguished all participants. Good afternoon, and it is my pleasure actually to participate in this webinar. And as Stefano and myself, we were talking a few months back. In fact, I arrived in Bahrain middle of March, just starting of pandemic. And it was really a challenging time for everyone. And as a head of mission, actually, it is a new world and a new normal, as we say it. Though I was lucky that though Bahrain, comparing other countries, they managed well, as distinguished panelists they have mentioned. From the beginning, actually, government of Bahrain, they have taken very extraordinary measures to contain the virus. And that's why we have seen that here, actually, not much of fatalities, actually. Death rate is very low, 0.3% or so. But still, there are some challenges, and we know that second wave is coming. So we have to be very cautious. And particularly about this survey, I'm very happy and delighted to see this survey in a very short period of time. They have conducted and published this result, and going to be published formally soon. And Dr. Omar, he has presented all details. I'll not be going into that part, but I understand actually what the results shows. It is actually what we generally perceive, actually. And I have seen among the Bangladeshi community, since I'm representing Bangladesh here, and I have close interaction with our community members, and it is exactly so. The most hard-hit community in Bahrain is Bangladesh community. And you will be happy to learn that actually, though it was a pandemic situation, but due to the very visionary leadership of His Majesty King Hamad bin Isa Al Khalifa, the Bahrain has managed, as I said, and also they have announced a very good economic stimulus. And I was also fortunate to present my credentials during this pandemic in May to His Majesty King. And in brief conversation with him, I learned that actually he is not differentiating between nationals and non-nationals. And it is a very good sign from the government of Bahrain. And all Bangladeshi living here in Bahrain, though they are hit by this virus, economically, but health-wise, since government of Bahrain, they have taken care of their free treatment if anybody is contracted with virus, and that is a good gesture from the government of Bahrain, and people are very happy to that. And one point I would like to mention here that at the beginning of pandemic, government of Bahrain has announced another good, measures, that is announcing amnesty for irregular workers. And through that, actually LMRA, they are conducting that regularization process. Already, I think 90% irregular Bangladeshi community, about 40,000, they were irregular without valid visa. They are almost regularized. And I am hoping by end of this year, since the time frame they have announced from April 1 to 31st December. So rest of the community, they will be regularized, that is for sure. And during this survey, about this survey, I would like to mention that you will be happy. Embassy of Bangladesh, we have taken initiative to upskilling our Bangladesh community. As your survey reflects that there are some interest of training, but not many people they are interested for training, but mostly they are interested for job information and getting jobs and rent support, as the survey says. But I understand if we can train, upskill those people, they will be better off getting suitable jobs. And in the interaction with Bahraini businesses, different industries, I gathered that they need also some quality workers. So hopefully by another month, we will be starting that upskilling project with the funding from the government of Bangladesh. And apart from this training, as it reflects in the survey, people of Bangladesh actually, they look for jobs, and we have opened a portal in our Facebook page where we invited people to register with us, and already 1,000 Bangladeshi, they registered, and we are referring them to different companies, and through that actually few hundred already they have been employed by different companies. So we are facilitating their job placement, job matching, and also required job information, because I understand because of pandemic, people are very desperate to get jobs. So hopefully with these initiatives of embassy and also very supportive role from the government of Bahrain and also Bahraini businesses and philanthropy, different humanitarian assistance group, they in the beginning they supported different Bangladeshi community members through giving food support, and from the embassy also we gave food support at initial phase. But no longer at this point they need this kind of temporary support, they need long-term support. And another important two aspects I tell you, SME, small medium enterprise development. Actually we are, I'm looking at with the Ministry of Industries, and hopefully with the Honorable Minister of Industry, I'll be proposing him to supporting Bangladeshi SMEs, those who are running here in Bahrain, giving loan support from Bangladesh commercial banks. I will be working on that, and I hope that that would be very good package for those who are doing business here in Bangladesh. And we will be continuing our community members building awareness for hygiene, health, and safety measures. And actually from the beginning of pandemic, Honorable Minister of Interior, actually he invited along with other labor sending countries like India, Pakistan, and Philippines. 4 ambassadors we were invited, and he then sought our support because half of population of Bahrain is expat community. So these 4 countries, they are most numbers of expat communities. So we committed then we'll be supporting the efforts of the government of Bahrain, Ministry of Health, to awareness building among the community members. So we are also working on that front. So I hope with the UNDP support, and also there are this kind of research, it will be very helpful. And in coming days, all these initiatives I would like to continue, so that we can live in a though it is a pandemic, very hard and difficult time economically for everybody, but hopefully with this kind of collaboration and also mutual understanding and support from different countries, and also I can see that US Embassy and British Embassy, they are also collaborating. And this comparison, actually, this is helpful for Bahrain. But certainly we look at Bahrain, and here from the Embassy of Bangladesh, we'll be happy to support any kind of research or support, or even real projects to be taken in collaboration with Bahraini businesses. Thank you once again.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. You put your finger on very, very key topics that I think that they emerge strongly from the survey, that I'm personally very, very very happy to hear that you find it useful. For instance, on awareness building, on training and retraining, the focus on that, and what you just mentioned on the regularization of current migrant workers that are in Bahrain. This is a true measure by the government of Bahrain that really shows, the openness and the willingness to make the most of the very hardworking Bangladeshi community that exists here. Not only Bangladeshi, all the other communities of expats that are here, as a matter of fact. Before I continue with Stuart, I want to say 2 things. One is on the UN, and the other one is on all our listeners and viewers that are with us today, 77. I encourage you to ask questions in the Q&A dialog box. Please type in your questions from now. I've already seen a couple, and start from now, because we will try to address as many as possible in the Q&A section that will follow Stuart's comments from the UK Embassy. And feel free to ask questions on this topic to all the panelists, and myself included, so that we can have a good discussion. The second thing that I do want to say is that UNDP is only one part of the United Nations here in Bahrain. We are a family of agencies. Some of my dear colleagues from the other agencies are with us today. Some of them are and will be part of this initiative through surveys, interviews, and studies. We have IOM, we have United Nations Environment, we have UNIDO, UNESCO, UNICEF. We have a variety of UN agencies here, and UNDP is only one of them. So I look forward very much, building on your remarks, Ambassador Islam, to work, for instance, with IOM, that is very energetic here in Bahrain and will be clearly an immediate partner for you and for other efforts here, but without taking anything from the additional agencies that I already mentioned. So I really look forward to this to take off even more. I didn't mention UN Women. This is another agency that hopefully we'll be working with. Now, Stuart, over to you, so that I can also clear my throat. Thank you very much, Stuart, really, to Roddy, the ambassador, and to yourself for being part of this initiative. And we look forward to hearing your views as well. Over to you, please.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody, and thank you very much, Stefano and Omar, for that really interesting introduction. And again, like my co-panelists, and thank you as well to them. We're very happy to be part of this study. I think it's really important. It's a very rich and detailed and interesting study. I think there's a lot of data to dig into there that's going to provide really interesting things to look at as we go forward. And I was very interested also to hear about the other studies you're doing in other parts of the world, and how they might fit together maybe at a later stage when you start to look at compare and contrast between countries. So that would be my sort of first or general observation, is that I thought it was quite interesting to sort of the countries that you chose here, because obviously Bahrain has done an excellent job in both getting the balance right between sort of health and economic protection. And I think the same could be said for all those countries that are involved here. That we've obviously spent a lot of time looking at the balance between health and economic protection. And it would be interesting to see with varying sort of policy approaches to those things, and varying kind of the balance between the two. And it'd be quite interesting to see when the larger data set comes in, potentially, to see how that affects the outcomes of your study, in terms of how different countries have taken that approach on the balance, and what effect that has had. So that'd be my sort of first overall general observation. The second is, of course, again, Bahrain has done very well, started very, very early, saw the danger to its economic based situation, and came up with a very quick fiscal stimulus package, which has obviously been very successful, has been rolled out. There's been other innovative ways of alleviating some of the burden, like looking at non-payment of or deferring payments on water, utilities, etc. And other countries, the UK, US, have done similar things. And again, it would be quite interesting, again, once that larger data set comes in, to see how those sort of approaches, what effects those different approaches have in terms of some of the vulnerabilities that people have been identifying. And thirdly, sort of general observation is on testing. And again, as someone wiser than me said quite recently, testing has been a real game changer in terms of how we handle all this. Whereas a vaccine is a game ender, testing is a game changer in how we can then ratchet up or down the balance between health and economic measures, or health and economic protections. And again, another interesting area to look at maybe would be how you see the different testing strategies and successes, and playing into that larger data set and the impact that COVID has had. So those are kind of very sort of big blue sky stratospheric observations, I would say at the beginning. So I think, I've been clear, Bahrain has been very innovative and very successful in the way that it's approached this, and obviously all plaudits due to His Royal Highness the Crown Prince and others involved. We've been very impressed, and obviously that's, as others have said, it has been really indicative of Bahrain that they have extended the health protection to everybody. They haven't discriminated, which of course is that is a major aspect of managing the impact of COVID on our society as a whole. And I think there are other countries that maybe have not taken such a broad view. I obviously won't mention any names, but I think that's quite important, looking at the socio-economic impact rather than just economic impact. That gives me a quick segue into singing the UK's song sheet for a little bit. I mean, obviously we spent a lot of time and putting a lot of money and effort into leading sort of the world's vaccine development multilateral effort. We're working obviously very closely with WHO. We're working behind the COVAX Advanced Market Commitment, looking at equitable access to vaccines. There was an event at UNGA last week which looked at that precise issue. So I think dealing with the inequalities that COVID is obviously showing up will be really crucial for us coming out on the other side in a good way. Looking at just some of the specifics in this study, again, the social, it's really important to look at the social as well as the economic aspects, which I think a lot of studies and a lot of the media coverage looks very much at economics and jobs and things like that. And I think it's really good that this is covered in the social aspects, some of these social activities that we sometimes take for granted. The fact that we can't do them anymore may have a longer term impact than just next week, next month, looking at health and those sorts of issues. What sort of impact are we talking about longer term down the track? There may be some benefits from this, more time with kids. I've certainly learnt my 2 times table again with my 8-year-old, those sorts of things. There may be some benefits in this that we need to kind of explore. I think policymakers will be looking at those issues. The other thing is, obviously, this is something that's really been shown up, is the sort of the inequality aspect. I mean, COVID affects everybody, and everybody's different aspects of people's lives in different ways. And obviously, the more vulnerable, the more exposed you are to these vulnerabilities. I would call them vulnerabilities because in normal life they would just be facts of life. But you know, in a COVID situation, pandemic situation, you might call them vulnerabilities. And it would be interesting to see if you look at sort of comparisons with certain communities in my country, for example, maybe geographical communities or communities in inner cities, and do a sort of extrapolate in the same way that you've done with Bangladeshis in Bahrain to see how that would look against the sort of the overall direction of travel in the UK. So I think it's quite interesting and important sort of study to do. I think one of the things really that this has exposed is the impact on young people, on the youth, and I think that fact is borne out by a lot of the data. I was struck by one of the charts I think that talked about people with children being less affected by job loss, whereas in fact actually that might, and possibly because of schooling and you know, being brought in the UK earlier, but actually it might have something to do with the fact that people with children might tend to be a bit older, and it's the young people that are losing jobs. And I think that sort of data is being shown up elsewhere in other parts of the study. And I think that's a useful segue into sort of the future and the strategic look ahead. Changing in the nature of work, all those sorts of questions about leisure, how the world economy is changing, you know, looking at things like 0 hours contracts, the gig economy, all those sorts of pressures that we've seen building over recent years, particularly in the UK, but not just in the UK, but in other countries. I think COVID has accelerated and has shown to be quite relevant, and possibly, you know, maybe the flip side of it will be that governments will look at finding out strategies for coping with these changes sooner rather than later. So that'll be interesting to watch. And how that all plays in, and how COVID plays into sort of the macro economic space, thinking about things like supply chains. So we all know how non-resilient some of our just-in-time supply chains are, for example, and sort of production facilities, inventories held in particular areas, and whether COVID will sort of diversify some of those production, inventory, footprint, resource footprints, etc. And then looking at bringing it back to Bahrain, how Bahrain benefits from those changes and what impact that might have on its societal makeup, including amongst expat labour and local you know, Bahraini nationals. I think I'll stop there. Thank you very much for this opportunity. It's been great, and I'll pass it back to you.
Thank you very much, Stuart. I think you also highlighted in a very complimentary way. We didn't really plan for this, but really how your remarks complement those of Rabia and Ambassador Islam. I mean, you focus on inequalities, you focus on long-term impact, you focus on how the micro interacts with the macro effects, and also on how we really have to look at the social side, and not only as it's more measurable, we look at the economic side, but really the effort here is to look at the multidimensional elements. I only missed you talking about the SDGs, but that would be my role. But really, I mean, fantastic insights, also focusing on the youth. I mean, you really laid out so many interesting elements that we are noting. What I did do, or I didn't do, was introduce you, Stuart. I'm really, really sorry about that. This is why probably I'm hardly ever the MC in meetings. Stuart, who we just listened to, Mr. Stuart Summers, he is still the Deputy Ambassador of the United Kingdom. He joined the Foreign Commonwealth Office in 1999. He was appointed as Second Secretary Political High Commission spokesman at the British High Commission in Nicosia in Cyprus in 2002. Then he was transferred to Prague as Second Secretary at the British Embassy in Prague. And after 4 years there, he was assigned as Head of Chancery in Iran, and later moved to Dubai as the head of the Iran office. Between 2013 and 2016, he was in secondment at the strategic planning at the European External Action Service. Prior to his current position at the British Embassy in Bahrain, he was for 2 years in London as the head of the France, Italy, Benelux team, Europe Directorate at the FCO. Thank you so much, Stuart. Sorry for not having introduced you earlier. So we are in good shape in terms of questions and answers. all those very patient ones who have been waiting to ask for their questions and listening. Thank you so much for remaining with us. Omar, if you agree, we just go directly to Q&As. Okay, so these are open questions. I mean, those who have asked them, they're not necessarily directing them to one person or the other. So one question is, why comparison is undertaken for Bangladeshis? So essentially, yeah, this is a good question. Why are we looking at Bangladeshis and not at the many numerous, also in numbers, expat communities in Bahrain? We can think about India, we can think about Pakistan and other nationalities. Maybe Omar, you can answer this, because this is kind of a low-hanging fruit on your end, and it has
Sure.
a statistical reason. Go ahead.
Yeah, the survey itself, so we made it available in 3 languages, English, Arabic, and Bangladeshi. And it was open to anyone. The only conditions for participating were being a resident of Bahrain and being over 18 years of age. We found the similar pattern, the same pattern we've had in our previous surveys, which is that even though we make them open to expatriates of all hues and origins, they tend to have a low propensity to participate. In the case of Bahrain, in terms of the size of the populations, by the way, the diasporas, India is the second most, so after Bahrainis in Bahrain, you've got Indians, and then Pakistanis and Bangladeshis. So I think Bangladesh is either the 3rd or the 4th. I can't remember if there's a 3rd or the 4th. There's approximately 100,000, something of that order. But anyway, we would welcome participation from others. Unfortunately, without a strategic partnership with the Bangladeshi embassy, we were not able. We would not have been able to even secure Bangladeshi participation. I think approximately 50 people or 40 people who are not Bangladeshi and not Bahraini participated. But as I say, if anyone knows how to get a group to participate, we'd be very happy to analyze their results, and we're very interested in them.
Thank you, Omar. We have another question. Now this one is indeed for the Ambassador of Bangladesh. Ambassador, can you elaborate more on the reduction of undocumented workers in the past few months? And do you think the challenge still remains to educate Bangladeshi nationals about health, national distancing protocol, and face mask violation? This goes a little bit beyond the study, but it's an interesting question. Ambassador, would you like to answer?
Yes, thank you, Stefano. Yes, Sandeep, actually, is from GDN, I understand. He asked this. Reduction, as I said during my remarks, that it is almost 90% they regularized. And number-wise, actually, I requested LMRA to provide the exact number, how many Bangladeshi they have so far within last 6 months or so, they regularized. And during remaining 3 months till December, I hope that almost all will be regularized, because from embassy's end, we are also pushing our community members, everyone, to regularize. Nobody should be here staying without valid visa. That is our actually target. And we also are supportive to LMRA, Government of Bahrain. Whatever needed, we'll be collaborating with them. Exact numbers still, as I said, 40%, it was anticipated the total number of irregular Bangladeshis, they were living here. And by that time, 35,000 plus actually they have. In other day, LMRA chief, Mr. Afsi, actually he publicly said that almost 40,000 plus regularized. And out of irregular expat workers, actually data Bangladeshi, they were total 90%. So with that calculation, I anticipate that it would be 35,000 plus. But exact number yet to be known, and I requested LMRA to provide that data so that we understand how many actually Bangladeshi still they have not regularized, so we can publicize, encourage them, and give incentives. As I said, also upskilling projects will be offering only those who are with valid visa. We will not be offering those who are not with valid visa. So that package perhaps will further incentivize all those irregular workers to be regularized. And regarding second one, yes, that is a challenge, because this survey also, as conducted by UNDP Derasat, it reflects that Bangladeshi community, they are the lower level of education, and they are doing actually petty jobs, different types of jobs, not highly paid salaries, and their understanding of health safety measures and hygiene, that is not adequate. That's why we are still continuing that publicity mechanism through our different channels, and also we distribute different brochures, published materials to those in our language, so that they know the health measures enforced by government of Bahrain, social distancing, and also wearing mask when they are in public. So that is being done, and I hope that community Bangladeshi, they have much improved. While this pandemic started, their lifestyle, since they were not habituated to lead like this kind of life, so they, over the months, they learned, and I'm hopeful within our consistent approach of encouraging them and publicizing, they will be more educated. And by the way, in upskilling project, I have added curriculum for health and hygiene measures also, so they know during their training how to lead a life maintaining that public health safety measures. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nazrul. We have, and thank you, Sandeep, for being with us and for asking the question. Very, very relevant question for what is really happening, in the grounds now today in Bahrain. Mahmoud asks Omar, do we have tentative percentage of contraction of the economy since the pandemic hit the kingdom? We do, and please, Omar, what is that number?
So in the first quarter, growth was approximately flat. And then in the second quarter, the data came out recently. We're looking at a contraction, I think, of about 9 or 10% year on year for the quarter. And then so the IMF, in terms of the forecast, so the IMF had a forecast in July, but there will be, I think on the 19th of October, I was visited their website this morning, they'll be releasing their regional economic outlook for Middle East and Central Asia. And that will include an updated forecast that takes into account all the most recent data. So I think the forecast previously was something of the order of 3% for the year contraction. But these things are revised regularly. So within 2 weeks, visit the IMF website and you'll find the latest release there.
Yes, thank you, Omar. Also for you, Omar, from Sandeep, can you shed light on the slide about COVID-19 employment effect and the difference between Bahraini and Bangladeshis? There seems to be a drop in the numbers. There is primary job from pre to post-pandemic. Do you think this creates another challenge now for authorities related to job losses and high unemployment rate among citizens, especially when new jobs are not being created under the present scenario? First, Omar.
Yeah, so I mean, first of all, the jobs are a challenge, I think, more or less everywhere in the world at the moment. I don't think anyone's come up with a solution there. It's definitely a challenge in Bahrain too. For the time being, because of the fiscal stimulus and the efforts exerted at saving jobs, we're yet to see the total impact. The figure, and we don't know what it's going to be like in the long run yet. Also because of, as you mentioned, oil prices, the macroeconomic environment is not clear yet. What I will say is that what's going to be important is, Bahrain's economy, a lot of jobs are tied with personal services and with tourism. and those two situations are two issues are as yet unresolved. Probably at the first quarter of 2021, hopefully if the King Fahd Causeway reopens in a way that is safe to all parties, we will get a better sense of what the long-term viability of certain sectors and jobs is. But for the time being, in general, the picture is unclear, and our survey is not well equipped to get into the details of what kind of jobs have been lost. We just wanted to get a gross picture, but one of the among the follow-up studies that we'll be doing is hopefully we'll get a better sense of that. We're actually hoping to get some data from the government that will allow us to answer your question in more detail, and hopefully once that data is available and we're able to analyzing, we'll be able to publish the results.
Thank you, Omar. You in a sense already answered to Sandeep's second question, which is on the outlook into 2021, the economic outlook. Do you think that Bahrain will face new challenges coupled with low oil prices and low tourism revenues? I mean, you answered it already. You want to add anything to that?
Well, I have to get Stuart and Rabia to speak to their governments to accelerate. They're the leaders in pharmaceuticals at the moment. UK and US at the forefront of the pharmaceutical solutions to this crisis. And I think both, the Oxford vaccine and the various vaccines being developed in the US, we're looking at, rollout for emergency rollout at the end in December maybe, but then more mainstream rollout in the second quarter of 2021. And I think the supply chains, fortunately, on this occasion, all parties have exerted significant effort in making sure that the supply chains are in place before, so that as soon as the vaccine is approved on scientific grounds, they can pull the trigger and get everything going quickly. So yeah, so I think that's going to be the thing we're most, that's going to potentially have the biggest positive impact on all economies, including Bahrain's, which is an operational vaccine in circulation and available at low cost. And in addition to that, I heard that I was reading the newspaper last week that I believe it was another UK innovation, which is the development of a test where the result comes out in approximately 20 minutes and for very low cost. That would also be highly complementary to a vaccine and highly useful. You can imagine for something like the international travel, where we're all sitting in the airport doing nothing anyway for a few hours. You might as well have a COVID test before you get on the airplane. So please, to our partners in the UK and US, make sure your scientific colleagues are working extra hard.
Indeed, absolutely. I echo that encouragement and hope. We have 10 more minutes, and there have been more questions asked. I really want to thank the proactivity of those who are listening to ask questions. I mean, really, this is really what this is for, ultimately, the webinar. There's one question that I'd like to provide an answer to, which has to do with an anonymous asked whether the follow-up surveys will include an assessment of how the pandemic has impacted women in terms of unpaid care, for work, especially with the temporary closure of schools and remote learning. Absolutely, yes. As we said, and I think that this was mentioned earlier, there will be follow-up services on different sectors, different specific themes that we want to dwell in, building on already the initial findings of the overall household survey. And yes, there's going to be a survey that will include the topic that you mentioned, specifically inquiring with women and how the impact of the pandemic has had, consequences on their everyday life, on their work, on their time, and on their livelihood as well. So this is a big yes to this question. Thank you.
Just briefly, Stefano, just to add to that, we'll also hopefully, if we can get access, we'll also be looking at the issue of domestic violence, which is obviously much more difficult to gather data on, but of extreme importance under the umbrella of that women's survey.
Very much so. And also, besides the surveys, we plan to speak, as Omar mentioned, civil society organizations and other actors as part of our stakeholders committee. So we will also be hearing the views on organizations that work a lot with women to what the effects have been generated for that population group. There's also a question on skilled versus low skilled workers, who are affected more, skilled or non-skilled. Well, we have proxies for that. We didn't really ask if the person works in a skilled or non-skilled workers, but we do have proxies using a lower education and also some population groups. Maybe Omar, you want to say more about that? It's quite conclusive and significant on that.
Yes,
right?
so in general, in all communities, UK, US, Bahrainis and Bangladeshis, people with lower education levels report high levels of economic distress, whether that's in terms of job losses or that's in terms of needing greater financial support and help finding jobs and so on and so forth. In fact, when I was looking at some macroeconomic data from the US last week, the jobs recovery in the case of high skilled jobs has been almost complete. I think most, when you break down unemployment for high skilled, it's been almost back to what they were pre-pandemic, and the groups bearing the brunt of the economic damage are people with lower wages, lower education levels, and we see a similar picture in Bahrain, and even whether you're looking at Bahrainis or with Bangladeshis, although it's not quite as acute as it is in some of the other countries, partially because of the strength of the government interventions thus far. But as I say, in the long run, it's not a clear picture yet. Hopefully, we won't get that far because the solutions to the crisis will emerge before that.
If I may add about
Please.
skill and non-skill, actually,
Yes.
since I have already data of 1,000 Bangladeshis, and among those 1,000 Bangladeshis, mostly unskilled. And since actually I have seen from Bangladesh community, those who have some certificates, some diploma, some quality, they are skilled, they are not unemployed. Actually, they are, sought after by industries. I have interaction with different industries. They are facing shortage of workers. And they asked embassy to provide some plumbers, electrician, construction workers. And I could not supply many because those who have those kind of skills, they are already employed. And registered with the embassy, these 1,000, mostly 90%, they are unskilled. So that's why I have taken this initiative with the collaboration with not only training institutions, but also with industry, who will be, after training, absorbing them. So it is a full, A to Z solution package. It is not we will be commissioning this training program only, but after completion of training, those people will be recruited by that industry. That is the package. So clearly it is indicative, though sample survey, if you call it in our system, in the embassy, it is indicative. Yes, those who are unskilled, they are vulnerable more. They are affected by this coronavirus pandemic. But those who are skilled, they are actually some sort of employment opportunities are there. Thank you.
You're on mute.
Much, Nazrul, and thank you for coming in. I mean, this is a conversation with all the panelists, of course, and Rabia and Stuart, feel free to come in as well. We have a question from Abdullah. He asks, current scenario shows that COVID-19 will be the new norm at least 1 year or more to come. The analysis showed that primary sector jobs are hardly hit. Actually, it's on primary jobs, so the main occupation, the main job of the respondent, not necessarily primary sector as in agriculture and essentially fisheries. This will have serious implications in many sectors, including agriculture, absolutely. What are the policy messages from the analysis? Anyone would like to venture in here? Omar, of course.
Well, what I would say is, first of all, what the idea that it's going to be 1 year until things improve. I'm not sure that's clear, to be honest. As I say, I think if unfortunately, if there's one thing that's become apparent from the beginning of this pandemic is how bad everyone's forecasts are. We've had some wildly optimistic ones and some wildly pessimistic ones, but whether, no matter how experienced and well trained the different parties are, the forecasts have proven to be wrong time and time again. But in terms of but let's assume that it is true. Let's assume that it is one year. The sectors, we've seen the pattern emerging. So I saw, for example, there was an interesting paper published by a bunch of economists a few weeks ago, looking at which jobs are most threatened by when you take into account automation. So what they did is they classified jobs into jobs that have high infection risk, things like dental hygienist or working as a respiratory medical professional, and then looked at jobs which are most liable to be automated. And then they found the intersection between these two groups, which are the jobs that are most under threat. Here we're talking about, I forget the exact cases, but there are various things like certain types of clerical work, which involve face-to-face clerical work, things like face-to-face salesman, face-to-face customer support, where there's a serious risk. And so probably we're going to be seeing those kind of changes being somewhat irreversible, even if it is the case that the vaccine comes out quickly and so on and so. So there's where I would imagine some restructuring. Also, one thing that's very interesting to keep track of is the changes in terms of urban structure. We've taken for granted for the last 300 years since the Industrial Revolution started that people live in cities, and prices of land and property are the highest in the middle, and people pay more to get access to the middle, and that you have a whole economy structured around the middle, where, for example, you have the restaurants and the cafes and so on, and the office buildings. But with the remote work proving to be a lot more successful than people imagined, and we're seeing a lot of companies across the world, and including in Bahrain, reduce their dependence on offices and switching to more remote work. And this potentially the upside, one great upside of this, apart from the environmental ones, is they can potentially resolve a lot of housing problems that exist in many countries. But it does mean also that the microeconomies that exist in city centers are probably under threat. And this has profound implications for employment, because you go somewhere like London or New York, and you'll find around the train stations, you'll find around the different high density areas, a lot of cafes and a lot of jobs along with that, and those are potentially not going to be sustainable in the long run. That doesn't mean that there's not going to be any jobs full stop. They're just going to be reallocated to something else. So it remains to be seen exactly what.
Yeah, I mean, just to jump in, I mean, I can completely agree with that. And as I mentioned, I think in my intervention, the future of work is a really key area of policy here. It was always going to come. It just might have come a bit earlier, but with a few changes, because obviously, if you talk about microeconomies around sandwich shops, for example, there was a bit of a kind of a hope that some of these retail outlets that are closing down because of online retail might redevelop into restaurants and those sort of leisure facilities. Well, that might not be the case if there is no demand because no one's in the city. So there's quite a few alterations to some of the kind of projections that some people have been making. And just to kind of also agree with you in terms of sort of when we might be seeing the end of this, it's again a little bit of like how long is a piece of string. As I mentioned, I think the test, a good test is going to be a game changer. A vaccine is going to be a game ender. But in terms of once you look at what vaccines are out there in development, I think from where we're looking at it, Q1 next year potentially we'll start looking at something starting to come out. But then you've got to test it, and you've got to then find a way of distributing it. So we're in it for a while, and as the, you know, our Prime Minister said, I think in the House, on an interview yesterday, it's going to be quite a bumpy ride still over the next few months. So I think we're still in a wait and see, and it's still unclear what the effect some of these developments are going to have in the macro sense immediately.
Yes, very much uncertainty ahead. And even though some questions go to what will happen, how is this going to be, how will this sector react, it's very, very difficult to give an answer. So we have to work with scenarios. We have reached the end of the webinar because we were aiming at 1 hour and a half, even though there were some questions left. But we will answer them separately. I hope that you will have that patience with us, because we have 3 also guest speakers that have extremely busy schedules. And so I would like to ask perhaps to Rabia, Nazrul, and Stuart, if you have just some concluding thoughts, and so that we can wrap up. Over to you, Rabia.
Thank you very much. My only concluding remark is to say that I look forward to the future surveys and the analysis of them. Today was an extremely illuminating and worthwhile and productive discussion, so I thank you.
Thank you, Rabia. Very, very kind for your words, and we look forward to working in the future, of course, with the US Embassy. Ambassador Nazrul.
Thank you, Stefano, and thank you, Dr. Omar, again. UNDP, Darasat, you have done a very commendable jobs at this survey, but I would like to emphasize here, actually, because of this new normal, I understand collaboration is the key. Actually, we have to collaborate as much as possible, and certainly there are challenges, there are different analyses, but if we work together, I am hopeful that we can pass through this challenging time. As Stuart said, testing and vaccine, actually, we don't know, as the Prime Minister of the UK said, bumpy rides, and we understand that. But if we can collaborate like this survey was done, and coming days, whatever we take, if we have this collaboration, then we can have more synergy and we can address the issues easily. And Embassy of Bangladesh here, we are ready, stand by to support any sort of collaboration, any study. And in future months, actually, I'm looking at different kind of collaboration with businesses, industry, government departments, whatever way we can move forward, and we can face this challenge and come up with certain ideas so that economic activity is revitalized and people get jobs and their income level and their safety security is there. So again, I would like to thank UNDP and Darasat for this webinar and conducting this survey. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. So it's testing, behaving safely, and adopting healthy habits that we all know, and hopefully reaching a vaccine, absolutely, with Stuart and Rabia's help. Over to you, Stuart, some concluding remarks?
Well, I mean, looking at the data, I was very interested to hear, as Omar pointed out, the sort of how Bahrainis have managed to get jobs in the COVID crisis. I think if we can find the secret to that, that will certainly be of interest, broader than just here. The other thing I'd also like to explore is why UK men are definitely not exercising as much as UK women are, according to that. But I think if you had a similar study of eating crisps, I think you might find the numbers reversed. But I would just finally echo what the ambassador just said in terms of collaboration. I think it's really important if we're going to face this. This is a challenge for all of us. It knows no geographic boundary, and I think collaboration through your good offices, Stefano, and others in the UN and elsewhere, I think will be absolutely critical and crucial to us meeting this challenge. So thank you, and thank you to everybody for having me on and participating.
Thank you so much, Omar. Thank you, Stuart, and thank you for for the touch of British humor that is always a wonderful flavor to add, even for topics like this. That definitely is a sobering one. So thank you very much to everyone. Omar, any final thoughts that you wanted to share?
No, just thanks very much to our panelists and for everyone who attended and asked questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much to everyone.
Thank you all.
Wholeheartedly for your patience of being part of this this conversation. Please sign up to our social media. I mean, I sound like some kind of a TV personality, which I'm certainly not. But this is the way that you will receive updates on what we're doing, on the the soon to be published report that we spoke about today, on future events. So really thank you to everyone for being part of this. Sign up to Derasat and UNDP in Bahrain, of course to the US Embassy, UK Embassy, and Bangladeshi Embassy. Thank you very much, and talk to you in a few weeks.
Thank you.
Take care,
Thank
stay
you all.
safe. Bye.
Bye bye.